What's up, y'all? I'm Cam Best. The OTA just dropped and there's some crazy changes. Let's check them out. First up, a buff that I consider long overdue. Hawkeye going from gaining 2 power to gaining 3 power, which actually gives you some payoff for playing him. When you're a one-cost card, you have less knobs for the developers to turn in order to make you relevant. So, generally speaking, the baseline for one-cost cards is 1-2 with a positive effect. So they're generally going to be in that range. Sometimes there are exceptions to this. A lot of the 1-3 cards have an effect that looks like a drawback, such as Blade or Zero, but can be an advantage in the right type of deck. Hawkeye now becomes a card similar to Rocket Raccoon, but a lot easier for you to trigger intentionally. Now, downsides. It does require you to actually play the card the next turn. So, Hawkeye on the final turn of the game, significantly worse than Rocket Raccoon. But there are some real upsides here just in terms of being an early good curve play, especially in the context of the proliferation of cards like Jeff, which allow you to trigger the Hawkeye, but not actually fully commit to that lane. Because the risk of something like this is playing a 1-cost and a 2-cost card in the same lane can often leave you unprotected, harder to fight for priority, overcommitted to a lane, and perhaps, maybe later in the game, you're going to wish you had more spots open in that lane, and you don't because you went to trigger the Hawkeye. Now, the main thing that I think needs to be talked about with this card is Killmonger. So basically, the way I see it, there's a ceiling on how good this card can ever really be, because Killmonger exists. And I think this card is not as game-changing of a one-cost card as something like Nebula or Sunspot is. And those cards, since they scale so much higher, are going to be the cards that people tend to build around in the one-cost spot. One possible application for a card like this would be Zoo. It's obviously like a clear upgrade in a Khazar Zoo deck, but Khazar Zoo isn't really a deck unless you're playing on a budget, and it'll only be that as long as Killmonger isn't real. So for now, I think Hawkeye is still going to be not the greatest card, but I do think that in the future, it's a good thing that this has happened. Perhaps in a less Killmonger heavy meta, there could be room for Zoo in the meta, and this would be a card that we would play. I don't expect that right now. Next up is Hulkbuster, keeping the same text, just getting a little bit of a buff, going from a 3-4 to a 3-5. Now, Hulkbuster is a card that generally only saw play in the context of like a Deadpool deck. That's really most of where this card has existed. I've also seen it in some like multiple man kind of decks where the idea is you want to make a big multiple man, you want to make a big Deadpool, and then you go about extracting value out of that multiple man or that Deadpool. Going to a 3-5 makes it just a genuinely decent card. Now, not in a deck that doesn't want to use space, Hulkbuster can be legitimately useful as just adding 5 power to a lane with no space required at all. Now, downsides. Generally speaking, a lot of the cards you're going to be putting Hulkbuster on if you're playing it as a generalist card rather than as a specific combo piece. There are going to be a lot of one-cost cards which may die to Killmonger. You're going to make your cards pretty big, maybe makes them vulnerable to Shang-Chi. So I think it still is going to be something of that combo piece, but it should give some real juice. I actually am interested to see if there's something there with Multiple Man, Phoenix Force, Hulkbuster. Because, if you multiple man Hulkbuster, that's 8 power. If you multiple man Phoenix Force, that is also 8 power. And 8 power is just the cutoff to not get hit by Shang-Chi. It's a good place to operate at. I'm also interested to see if this picks up as a generalist option, because it is genuinely pretty strong. But I do worry that the dual threats of Killmonger and Shang-Chi will make it a little bit less productive as a generalist option than it might otherwise be. Hulkbuster is a card I'm excited to see in the future. That said, there is something to bring up. I do believe that it has been floated in the past by many people. Hey, why does Hulkbuster not change the card's cost to the cost of Hulkbuster or add the Hulkbuster cost to it. And I think this comes up a lot because people don't like the stuff they get Hulkbustered getting Killmongered. And I think right now, as I recall, the last time I heard communication from the devs on this was, the answer was, most of the time people use it, that's actually just the downside, right? If you Hulkbuster a Deadpool and the Deadpool goes to 3 or 4 cost, that's bad. That doesn't means your deck doesn't work. So right now, I would expect it to stay the same as it is, and I think this is a solid buff to an underplayed card. Speaking of solid buffs to underplayed cards, Vision getting another little bump in power up to a 5/8, and now he is a much stronger, I think, generalist option at that cost. 5/8 is a really important stat line. Really, the 8 is important. Not getting Shang-Chi'd is a big deal. Getting the maximum value out of not getting Shang-Chi'd is another big deal. Keep in mind, when they nerfed Black Bolt, they knocked him down from 8 to 7, and that ended up really mattering. Another card that people underrated a lot recently, Legion, 5/8. The 8 is just a solid number that is hard to interact with. Now, Vision is going to be a solid card that is hard to interact with, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him popping up in a lot of interesting places. He's going to be something of a default 5-cost card. Like, for example, the decks that are currently running Legion, I wouldn't be shocked if Vision ended up being better in those spots. I would definitely want to investigate him in a good card shell. I'd like to investigate him in Shuri, where he's already seeing play. Maybe in Thanos. A 5/8 is significant. It doesn't sound like a lot going from 5/7 to 5/8, but moving 8 power around the board every turn, that's a big deal. Now, you might be asking, if they're changing Vision, doesn't that make him way better than Captain Marvel? And, boy, do I have some news for you. Captain Marvel, higher, further, faster, baby, is now a 4/5. And that 4 cost is really, really important because of the existence of Zabu. 4/5 moving around the board to wherever you need it is quite powerful. One thing I'd like to point out is that, Zabu synergy aside, 5 power is a really important breakpoint. Dr. Doom's Doombots are only creating 4. Captain Marvel one-ups those Doombots by moving over there now at a much lower cost. So I do think that this Captain Marvel, assuming she sees a ton of play, might actually be a bit of a stealth nerf to Dr. Doom. As far as the decks she might see play in, I do wonder if maybe it's a little hard to get her into the Zabu good cards shell, right? You tend to be pretty full up there between Enchantress, Shang-Chi, Rockslide, maybe Iron Lad, and of course Darkhawk. But if you don't have Iron Lad, I do wonder if she'd be a very solid budget replacement, just a good card you're always happy to see. And a lot of Iron Lad's utility in the deck is just, this is a good card, I'm always happy to see it, I like it. And between Jeff and Captain Marvel, you have a lot of ability to attack now closed-off locations, so I'm definitely excited to see what she can do in a Zabu good cards style list. But I'm also excited to see what she can do just as like a card people can play more, because a 5/6 is hard to play, a 4/5 is a lot easier to play. It's a lot easier to like weave into your curve. I'd be interested to see if she makes it into like high evolutionary lockdown decks, or maybe the Legion scam decks. I guess you have to play Storm on turn 4 for those to work, but like they still need backup plans. I'm definitely interested to see where this card goes. I'm excited because Captain Marvel is an incredibly powerful superhero. I'm pretty much a big fan of Brie Larson, and she's never been good, and now she might be. Finally, Absorbing Man, same text, copies an on reveal, but gains 2 whole power, going from a 4/3 to a 4/5. And this is some really, really, really hardcore stuff right here. Absorbing Man was already a card that when he first came out, people experimented with in Sarah as a way of having like 2 Shang-Chis. Now, though, Absorbing Man can be 2 Rock Slides, etc. One thing that I do wonder, though, is how much of a role does he have, and how often is he going to be played where Iron Lad wouldn't be played? Because Iron Lad fills a pretty similar role of giving you sort of 2 of your beneficial effects, just with less control for you, but of course more upside because he's a little bigger. Now, another thing that this card could do is go into some combo style decks and make them a little bit more effective just because he's more of a value play now. So Toxic Sarah could maybe see some benefit from this guy, and several other decks that are built around on-reveal effects, but not necessarily so built around on-reveal effects as to always lose to a Cosmo, could really get some mileage out of this. The reason I bring up Toxic Sarah is because it's a deck that's doing things that are not all losing to Cosmo, but it does benefit from, say, doubling up on some on-reveals. Of course, doubling up on Rock Slide, doubling up on Korg, also powerful. People are gonna experiment with this card in the Darkhawk shell, and they should. So, what do you think of these OTA changes? I personally am extremely excited to see how the meta shakes out after this. I don't expect huge changes to come from this. I think, you know, it'll probably still be some good Darkhawk decks, some good Thanos decks, some good High Evolutionary decks. But I am definitely interested in the Absorbing Man change and the Captain Marvel change. Both of those seem absolutely captivating to me. And the Vision change, I think, puts him in real contention for just one of the best 5-cost cards in the game that you can just play in a bunch of different lists. He's very, very good now. So I think those three are the changes that I'm really focused on. What was your favorite? As always, put it in the comments below. I will read every single one. Thank you so much. I've been CamBest. You have a good one. Peace.